Yes, familiar with them? Based on the four elements that Aristotle gave us, right? Earth, air, fire, water. Great name for a band. But if you have these four elements in you, the one is air. And if you have too much air in you, you get all puffed up and you talk a lot. Sorry. Sort of like Falstaff, right? Because you have too much air. And even Falstaff jokes about having too much air, in battle. And he's going, and what leads me into battle? Courage. What is courage? It's a mere word. What is a word? Air. I'll have none of it. Then he runs the other way. So Falstaff is Shakespeare's example of someone who has too much air in him. Fiery Hal is a character that has too much fire. He's running and getting into trouble all the time, and so on. Too much water. Who's our favorite? The best Shakespearean character that has too much water? Ophelia. She's crying all the time, making water all over the place. And how does she die? Ploosh. She drowns herself jumping out of the castle in Denmark out of depression. Right? So Ophelia, and even the image you see of her, with her white dress and her hair floating dead in the water is all very watery kind of a image, right? So Shakespeare gives us someone with too much water. And what about too much earth? Best character Shakespeare wrote expressing that was Cassius from Julius Caesar. Cassius has that lean and hungry look, and if you had too much earth medically, what that did was cause constipation. So many of the characters that were referred to as Jakes were individuals that had too much earth in them. Why? Because Jakes was what they used to call the toilet. And obviously, if someone had constipation, they're always sitting on the toilet without much result. By the way, the name Jakes stopped being used for the toilet when they decided to hate King John, and they changed the toilet's name to John. So we still use.
Yeah. I like how the British royal family refuses to name any of their children like John because of how horrible King John was.
How many Johns do we have in the room? Quite a few. Mm-hmm. No offense, because I don't call my toilet a John. That's silly. I call it a Johannes instead. But that's just neat. But so the four elements are part of your health. And what they thought was a healthy person was someone who had everything in balance. And so here's the goofy reasoning. If you're ill, we'll take a pan of blood out of you because that will bring everything down. And hopefully that will, level out some of the disparities between so instead of, this odd arrangement, it'll bring it back into harmony and you'll be healthy again. George Washington had the one pan of blood taken out the one day, and the doctor came back the next day and discovered that he was worse. And so he took another pan of blood from him the second day, and the next day he died. Probably from lack of blood. That's really a terrible thing to do when someone's ill, is to make them weaker by taking blood out of them. And yet that was the main approach doctors had to patients who were ill back then. I don't know what he would have done in those cases, but what he did do was use things like food and other physical chemicals in order to try to cure people. So using physical things instead of magical things is what he brought to the field. So my quiz question for today, if you hadn't noticed, was what do you think of Dr. Theodore Mayern. He's also referred to, let me see if they have Trevor Roper is the, so this book is a great source for him, if you're interested. By the way, Trevor Roper was a great author. He's dead now, but he wrote some interesting books. In fact, I think he wrote another one. The Invention of Scotland. That's not really the one I wanted to mention. No. Let me mention. So how does this work? Remember that Martin Luther is an Augustinian monk that tries to reform the church and instead ends up creating a separate sect who became known as the Lutheran sect. Right? He also had influence on others. Another Augustinian that he influenced was John Calvin. Hateful man, actually.
Something they have in common. And I'm coming to realize Martin Luther kind of hated everything. He hated Plato, he hated
He loved his wife.
How
many children did they have? No, Luther, and he of course gave us the German Bible. I mean, yes, there would be a lot of things I suppose we could find. But remember, this is the end of the Middle Ages, not really even the end, really, in a lot of ways. But John Calvin starts his own sect in Geneva, Switzerland. The Calvinists, they become known as, right? And one of his friends, who's also there in Geneva, is from Scotland, and his name was John Knox. Lovely looking gentleman. Maybe I should get rid of my beard. John Knox becomes another reformer, and since he's from Scotland, he heads back to Scotland and he reforms the church in Scotland, and that one becomes the Presbyterian Church, so called because the presbyters, the council of the church. Anybody Presbyterian? Is Presbyterian? That's I suppose the most famous aspect of the Presbyterian Church is the concern with predestination. Remember with St. Augustine, a concern that people had over free will. You know, are you free to actually choose to do anything? And if you create it, you know, do it, make it. If you're sinful, right? What's the right verb for that? Do a sin? No. Make a sin? No. You do something sinful. There you go. You are guilty, and you should be punished for it. Well, but the question is, of course, according to St. Augustine, if all of time and space exists sort of at once in God's point of view, God knew what you were going to do. God created you and the situation so that you would do that. Why on earth would God punish you for something that God could have prevented but didn't? Doesn't seem right. Remember, he solved that problem by saying, well, even though God knows what you're going to do, you're still the one with the free will to decide what you do, and so you choose to do that. even though God knew you were going to do that. So that's a solution, apparently. In the Calvinist church, it became a real concern because they believed that a certain select few people were already saved throughout all time and space, because God knew which ones were going to be saved and the other ones not. And so no matter what you did, actually, wasn't going to change the outcome. You were predestined to be either saved or not. The thing is, those who were going to be saved, those who were predestined to be saved, would be wealthy and have a good life and happy and all that stuff, well, because they're God's saved, predestined individuals, and all the ones that are homeless living down in the woods are clearly not predestined to be saved and are sinful, and it's their own trajectory, so to speak, to forever be lost. Predestination. Interesting Calvinistic or Presbyterian issue. But the Presbyterians were the council members of the church in the Scottish churches, the Kirk, and they ended up voting on who the ministers should be. Unlike the Roman Catholic Church, where the Pope appoints the cardinals appoint the bishops appoint the monsignors appoint the priests for the various churches and other institutions. Top down, very much like a king. I mean, a king is appointed by God. God appoints the king appoints his counselors and his nobles, and the nobles appoint. So top down. Right? Instead, the Scottish Kirke, Kirke is German, but the Scottish Kirk worked out really well. The Scottish people really liked how the churches worked out, because they preferred to have the local rich people choose who were going to be the ministers instead of the top-down organization of the church. That worked so well that they decided to use that same system for their government. So they transformed their government into a bottom-up organization, an election. And that, under the name of the book, How the Scottish Created the Modern World, right? How did that happen? They created these elections for their authorities, and that ended up trickling down south into England. Edinburgh University began teaching this, and of course continued down. And when you get down far enough, you end up influencing the young people studying in England. And that's going to affect the education of Thomas Hobbes. Let me make sure we'll continue to think about Descartes, because Descartes is engaged with Hobbes over several different things. But if we look at Thomas Hobbes, I mentioned that one of his mentors was Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon is also a reformer of sorts. He's reforming how knowledge works. I mentioned that he gives us inductive thinking as opposed to deductive thinking. Deductive thinking is all you need if you believe all the knowledge is already there, and you just have to find conclusions from all that in order to know what the answer to your particular question is. But if you're reforming the way knowledge is based, you have to find ways of experimenting and predicting how cause and effect will result in different things. And so you're going to need inductive reasoning. And Francis Bacon gives us the idols that you have to be aware of. Maybe this is a nice summary. So when we're looking at the idols that he's talking about, is you have to be aware of the idols of the tribe, the den, the market, and the theater. Well, what are these? Well, the idols of the tribe, that's literally your tribe or your community. The community believes things from however they learned them, right? The trouble with those things is everybody believes them, no one investigates them scientifically to see if those beliefs are correct. And guess what? If you do, you probably discover that they're wrong. So you have to clear